Hey, it's Rochelle. So I want to talk today about the difference between childhood trauma and adult onset trauma. So I get asked this question a lot because people seem to get frustrated with themselves if they're dealing with a trauma that they've had since childhood. And like really typical language I hear around this is, I don't know why that matters anymore. It's been 30 years, or I don't know why I can't put this behind me, or it just seems like I just can't get over this, or I try never to think about that, but when I do, it just can come flooding back. And so I want to explain a little bit about how childhood trauma is different. First of all, if you are a childhood trauma survivor, you are strong, you are brave, you are resourceful, you had an adaptive mind, and I just see so much depth and character of the people that I work with that have really just overcome a lot. And I want to explain how that looks differently in the brain and how it needs to look different in treatment so that you can like break free from this and really be healed, like healed at a physiological level where you don't feel bound to that trauma anymore, and you don't stay stuck needing to constantly avoid that trauma or those triggers. So in childhood, in those early years of life, our nervous system is learning to regulate. And when we're born, we're all bottom brain. Like our protective limbic brain is totally online. We startle easy. It's looking for threats. It's figuring out how are we going to survive in the world? How are people going to care for us? How are we going to get our needs met? All the things that help us feel safe. And there's, of course, we don't have language. Our prefrontal cortex is pretty much just blank, right? But then it starts mapping. So those original childhood experiences, what happens is down here, in our bottom brain, our trauma brain, when we have like our amygdala, which is turns fight or flight on or off. So our kind of alarm system in our brain, it's very active when we're young. So you can think about a baby and how they startle if a dog barks or fireworks or a loud noise or a Santa beard or a new face or whatever, because it's always kind of alert to danger. And then hopefully if by the ages of like 10 or 12, if things have been consistent, safe, secure, if caregivers were there to meet the needs and be attentive to the child kind of learns, oh, it's safe. I can kind of relax and play and do my own thing, and mom and dad are going to keep me safe, and the world's pretty consistent. The world's pretty safe. I'm pretty safe in the world. People in the world look at me and think that I'm okay. Then the amygdala starts to prune, meaning that we have less activity. It's like, okay, I don't need to be on guard all the time because the adult things are kind of taken care of. And so the nervous system gets this calm state. This is if things are going well, right? If things are going well, the amygdala calms, our brain learns it's okay to feel my emotions, it's okay to be safe in my environment. And so the child doesn't have as many reasons to startle and be on alert and be hypervigilant. But if things do not go well and childhood trauma is present, then the amygdala stores the hippocampus, the part of our brain involved in memory, stores all this information, and it makes us very hyper alert. So I can't be on guard, I can't relax. I have to constantly be watchful, constantly be on guard, aware of what's going on in my environment, and ready to respond to be able to protect myself, because the adults in my life have not been able to keep me safe. I'm kind of in it on my own. Another thing that happens in childhood trauma is it's often like a bad thing happens, and then if it happens within the family or there's not support there, then it's not just the trauma of what happens, but it's what didn't happen after, meaning I didn't get comfort, I didn't get safety. So basically this amygdala then does not prune. It does not say everything's safe in the world. In fact, it stores other messages, right? Your brain says it's not okay, I have to be on guard, I have to watch other people, it's not okay to trust. All of the things that make us feel on guard, as well as storing trauma memories. A lot of times children have to freeze, so we think fight, flight, or freeze. So if someone attacks me, I can fight them. If I don't think I can fight them, then I can get the heck out of Dodge. And if neither of those things can happen, as is often the case in childhood, they have to freeze. So when they freeze, all those nervous system responses get stored at a cellular level in the nervous system. So when you take, let's look at person, let's say adult, who's had a safe childhood moving along. Their brain says everything's okay. The adults have got it. I can relax. I can create. I can play. I can be imaginative. They have a very safe baseline. And then let's say something happens, and maybe there's a car accident, or maybe they have a catastrophic death or something in their life, and they have trauma symptoms around that. Now with this adult person we're talking about, this adult onset trauma, the way you work with that is it's relatively easy. So you have this person who had this stable baseline, and then they have this cluster of trauma symptoms. So they say, before I was just fine, but now every time I get on the highway, or every time I go to this hospital or smell that smell, then I start getting flooded with these trauma symptoms. So you have the baseline and you have the trauma symptoms. And so your intervention is going to go to be in and clear this trauma symptom. So I use EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. It's the preferred method of treatment for trauma. So you go in and you target the trauma symptoms, and the brain is able to process them with a little help, and you get back to a baseline, and all is good. And this can happen very quickly with EMDR. I've had people come in and, within one session, which is, I'm not going to say that's very not typical to be just one session, within very few sessions, someone with an adult onset trauma can clear trauma very quickly, say, gosh, I'm not even triggered anymore. It just feels like I can have that trauma memory, and it doesn't feel traumatic anymore. It feels properly put in the past. And so that's how adult trauma works. And again, you're still, even with adult onset trauma, you're going to need brain-based strategies usually. Usually talk therapy is not a resolution to trauma. So EMDR is what I use and what I prefer. I've also heard good things about other strategies, brain-based strategies. Usually talk therapy is not going to help squelch trauma when you have PTSD. Childhood trauma is like this though. You know where I said we had that baseline for that adult that had this safe upbringing as a child, that their nervous system oriented around safety, oriented around being able to relax, their amygdala pruned, and they don't have to be on guard all the time. That person, you take their trauma and they don't have this nice, comfy baseline of rest and digest. Their parasympathetic nervous system, which is rest and digest, really didn't get established because they were always in this fight or flight. So they had a hyper aroused nervous system from a very early age. So you take this person with, usually that's complex trauma, or trauma that started in childhood and often was repetitive or chronic, or the way the brain organized around the way it fired and wired together was around trauma. Their baseline is a hypervigilant state. They never really relax. They don't even really relax and sleep a lot of time. A lot of times they have just, perpetual nightmares or trouble falling asleep because their brain says it is not safe to let go, because you're not okay and you have to be on guard. So this person, even though, let's say they're going along and they've done that freeze response, and maybe they've disassociated, and maybe they can operate and look just fine. I mean, a lot of the people I have who've had childhood traumas, they function very well. They function very well in society. They're incredibly adaptive, a lot of times incredibly bright, and they've just developed these really amazing coping strategies, but there's a lot of internal distress, and a lot of times a lot of distress in their relationships as well. And I'm not saying this person can't look like they have a lot of addictions and a lot of chronic mental illness, because certainly that happens a lot of the time. I'm just saying it's not necessarily so. But you take this person and they've never had this baseline to get back to. So when their baseline is up here, and then you say, oh yes, and now I have this trauma and I'm going to try to resolve this trauma. So I've got the baseline and the trauma symptoms. You go to the trauma symptoms, they don't get down to a state of rest and digest because they never had that safety. So when you have childhood stuff that has not been resolved, really it's not just resolving the trauma symptoms, it's about working at that baseline of feeling safe in your body and relieving the nervous system response that you had, changing the brain and the way it fires, and you have to work through the body. And so if you have had child onset trauma and conventional strategies have not been helpful to you, about 10 years ago, when I started doing EMDR initially, I found this a lot. I'd be like, why isn't this working? It just works like this for some people, and then other people are staying stuck and getting dysregulated. And so then I had to go on and get a lot more training in attachment trauma and dissociation disorders and that sort of thing, because oftentimes those accompany complex trauma. But if you're one of those people and you feel like, what can I do because nothing is working? First of all, I want you to give yourself a lot of grace, because you may feel like, how come maybe my spouse had an affair and my friend's spouse had an affair and they were able to recover, or maybe this certain thing that everybody in my community has, maybe there was a tornado or there was some loss or something, and other people seem to be rebounding faster than you, and you're getting impatient with yourself going, I don't know why, something like this happens and I feel myself shutting down, or I'm in bed for days, or I can't seem to regroup. I want to give you permission to just say that not all of our nervous systems are equally prepared to absorb those kinds of things. And so sometimes if you've got trauma and it's not clearing, it's because you really need more help dealing with that baseline of safety in your body and in your nervous system, not just talk or strategies aimed at resolving a here and now problem. So I hope that makes sense. But again, childhood trauma versus adult onset trauma. Childhood-based trauma, you oftentimes didn't have that baseline of safety. So you have to work at a foundational level, putting in that safety and relieving the nervous system. Adult onset trauma, oftentimes if there was safety in childhood, you can work directly at just the trauma symptoms, and then the person will go back down to baseline. So that's a primary difference in understanding the brain and how it works. And we could go a lot more in depth to this, because there's a lot about how the brain responds to trauma and how it helps. And basically just think about kids. Like, kids oftentimes, they are stuck, so they can't get away, they can't trade in their family, they can't get in their car and drive away. And so the mind has to be just incredibly adaptive, and is very adaptive to dealing with chronic stress in a way that allows them to still function, to still go to school, to still interact. But again, a lot of times that's a freeze response. A lot of times that's disassociation, which is checking out, or even when there's extreme or perpetual abuse, it will be development of different parts of self, which we all have parts of self, but these parts are very extreme and hold traumatic memories and kind of protect the self. So there's a lot of complexity in understanding what happens in the brain of a child, but just to know that if you are one of those, that there's healing available. But again, highly recommend attachment focused EMDR is very helpful if you've got this kind of thing going on. And feel free to private message me, or just drop in the comments if you have any questions that I can help resolve. I hope this was helpful, and I look forward to being able to give you more information. Again, my name is Rochelle Walsh, and I'm a trauma and anxiety specialist. I've been licensed for 20 years and enjoy helping people get to freedom in regards to their mental health. So I hope you have a great day. Bye.